My phone rang at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the name on the screen instantly twisted my gut. It was my son, Ethan, and the words he stammered out changed everything in an instant. I was at my kitchen table, buried in case files from my shift that had ended hours ago, when his name flashed. Ethan never called this late unless something was seriously wrong. "Dad," his voice came through, shaky and uneven. "I'm at the Oakland precinct. Mark attacked me at the house, and now he's filed a report saying I assaulted him. They're holding me here." My blood went cold, but 23 years on the force kicks in fast. You learn to compartmentalize, to push emotion aside and focus on facts. I grabbed a pen and notepad, my hand steady. "Which officer is handling this?" "Sergeant Ben Carter." "Dad, I didn't do anything." Mark came at me first, but they're believing his story because he's got scratches on his face. "Ethan, listen carefully. Don't say another word to anyone until I get there. Not a single word. Understand? If they try to question you, politely decline and ask for your attorney." "Okay." "Which station again?" "Oakland." "Sit tight. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, staring at the phone for exactly 3 seconds before moving. Most fathers would have called a lawyer. Most would have shown up in civilian clothes, ready to play the worried parent. But I wasn't most fathers, and this wasn't a situation for conventional tactics. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out my uniform. My Class A's were pressed and ready, captain's bars gleaming on the shoulders. 23 years of service, represented in every ribbon and commendation on my chest. I dressed methodically, checking each button, making sure my badge sat perfectly centered. My ex-wife, Sarah, had married Mark 2 years after our divorce. I'd met him exactly 3 times, each interaction leaving me with the same impression: the man was a coward who put on a good show for other adults but revealed his true nature when he thought nobody important was watching. Ethan had mentioned incidents before, small things that individually seemed minor, but formed a disturbing pattern. A shove here, a grab there, always explained away as accidents or misunderstandings. 3 months ago, Ethan had shown up at my apartment with a bruise on his shoulder. He'd been vague about how it happened, but I'd seen enough domestic situations in my career to recognize the deflection tactics of someone covering for a mistreater. I'd filed that information away, knowing that pushing too hard might make him retreat completely. Now Mark had crossed a line, and he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation by bringing the police into it. I drove to Oakland with my lights off, keeping exactly at the speed limit. The city passed by in familiar patterns, streets I'd patrolled as a rookie officer fresh out of the academy. Back then, I'd been eager to prove myself, working double shifts and taking every difficult call. The work had cost me my marriage, but it had also given me purpose and eventually the rank I'd earned through years of sacrifice. The Oakland precinct sat in a converted brick building that had once been a textile factory. I'd worked out of this station for 6 years before my promotion to captain moved me downtown. I knew every officer here, had trained half of them personally, and had written recommendation letters for their promotions. I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the front entrance. The night officer, a young woman named Officer Maya Rodriguez, looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw my uniform. "Captain David Miller, we weren't expecting you tonight, sir. I'm here regarding a situation with my son, Ethan Miller. I understand Sergeant Carter is handling the case." Maya's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "Yes, sir. The sergeant is in interview room 2 with the complainant. Your son is in the waiting area by processing." "Thank you, Officer Rodriguez." I moved through the station with the confidence of someone who'd walked these halls 1,000 times. Several officers nodded as I passed, their expressions curious but respectful. The waiting area came into view, and I spotted Ethan immediately. He sat hunched forward on one of the plastic chairs, his left eye swollen and a cut above his eyebrow that had been cleaned but not bandaged. His knuckles were scraped raw. When he saw me, relief flooded his face so completely that he looked about 12 years old again instead of 17. Dad. I placed a hand on his shoulder, keeping my voice low. Don't worry. Have they formally charged you with anything? No, but Sergeant Carter said Mark wants to press assault charges. He told me I should just confess now because it would go easier on me. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Carter was operating by the book, trying to close a case quickly by pressuring a scared teenager into a confession. Standard tactic, but completely inappropriate when the physical evidence clearly contradicted the complainant's story. Did you make any statements? I told them Mark attacked me first, that I was defending myself. Then Carter said that's what everyone says and started asking if I'd been drinking or using substances. I got scared and stopped talking. Good. That was exactly right. I squeezed his shoulder once. Stay here. Don't speak to anyone. I walked toward interview room 2 with measured steps. Through the window in the door, I could see Sergeant Ben Carter sitting across from Mark. Mark was mid-30s, average build, with the kind of face that looked earnest and trustworthy in the right light. He was holding an ice pack against his cheek and gesturing animatedly while Carter took notes. I opened the door without knocking. Carter looked up, and his expression went through several rapid changes as he processed my presence. Surprise gave way to confusion, then to something resembling alarm as he registered the uniform and rank insignia. Captain Miller. He stood automatically, years of training and protocol overriding his confusion. Sir, I wasn't aware you were involved in this case. Mark's head swiveled toward me, and I watched the color drain from his face. He'd expected a worried father in jeans and a jacket. He'd expected someone he could manipulate or intimidate through the legal system. He hadn't expected this. Sergeant Carter, I'm Captain David Miller, Ethan Miller's father. I understand there's been an incident at Mr. Branson's residence involving my son. Carter glanced between Mark and me, clearly calculating his next move. Yes, sir. Mr. Branson here has reported that Ethan became violent during an argument and assaulted him. He's requesting we press charges. I moved further into the room, and Carter instinctively stepped back slightly. I wasn't trying to intimidate him specifically, but decades of command presence don't just turn off like a switch. I see. And what physical evidence has been collected to support this account? Mr. Branson has visible injuries, sir. Scratches on his face and bruising on his arms. Defensive wounds, I said calmly. Consistent with someone fighting off an attacker. And my son, what injuries has he sustained? Carter hesitated. He has some minor facial injuries and scraped knuckles. Minor. I let the word hang in the air. Sergeant, my son is sitting in your waiting area with a black eye, a laceration above his eyebrow that likely needs stitches, and defensive wounds on his hands. Would you characterize those as minor if you saw them on a domestic violence victim? Mark found his voice. Now, wait just a minute. Your son came at me in my own home. I was defending myself from a violent teenager who's been increasingly aggressive and, Mr. Branson. I turned my full attention to him, and he flinched despite himself. I'm going to need you to stop talking now. You can't just come in here, and Sergeant Carter, has Mr. Branson provided any witnesses to corroborate his version of events? The incident occurred when he and Ethan were alone in the residence. Sir, has he consented to photographs documenting his injuries from multiple angles? We took basic photographs when he arrived. Basic photographs? I nodded slowly. And did you measure the depth and severity of the scratches? Document whether they appear to be offensive or defensive in nature? Check Mr. Branson's hands for any signs he threw punches? Carter shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with all due respect, this is my case and you're doing your job, Sergeant. I understand that. But I'm asking whether you've conducted a thorough investigation or whether you've simply taken Mr. Branson's word at face value because he's an adult and Ethan is a minor. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Mark's face had gone from pale to flushed, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized his narrative was falling apart. "There's something else you should know, Sergeant." I kept my voice level, professional. "Over the past 6 months, Ethan has mentioned several incidents involving Mr. Branson. Physical intimidation, grabbing, shoving. Nothing he wanted to formally report because he was afraid of making things harder for his mother. I documented these conversations just in case they became relevant." Mark shot to his feet. "That's complete garbage. I've never laid a hand on that kid except in self-defense tonight." "Really?" "Because I have text messages from Ethan describing an incident 3 months ago where you grabbed him hard enough to leave bruises. I also have a photograph he sent me showing those bruises." The lie came out smoothly, convincingly. In truth, Ethan had only mentioned the incidents verbally, and I'd never gotten photographic evidence. But Mark didn't know that, and more importantly, he couldn't be certain what evidence I actually possessed. His face went through several expressions before settling on barely controlled anger. "You're threatening me." "I'm stating facts, Mr. Branson. Facts that will come to light if you insist on pursuing false charges against my son." Carter cleared his throat. "Captain, perhaps we should take a step back here. Mr. Branson, would you be willing to have our EMT take a more detailed look at your injuries just to make sure we have everything properly documented?" Mark looked between us, clearly trying to decide his next move. The confident complainant from 10 minutes ago had vanished, replaced by someone who'd realized he'd walked into a trap of his own making. "I want to speak with my wife," he said finally. "Of course. You're welcome to use the phone in the lobby." Carter gestured toward the door, clearly eager to de-escalate the situation. Mark stood and walked past me without making eye contact. The moment the door closed behind him, Carter let out a long breath. "Sir, I need to be honest with you. When this call came in, it seemed straightforward. Adult male with visible injuries, teenage boy with a history of, what history?" I kept my voice neutral, curious rather than accusatory. "Mr. Branson mentioned Ethan had been in trouble at school for fighting." Carter consulted his notes. "He said there were multiple incidents over the past year." "Sergeant, Ethan hasn't been in a single fight at school. He's on the honor roll and plays varsity soccer. If Mr. Branson told you otherwise, he lied. Which calls into question everything else he's told you tonight." Carter rubbed his face with both hands. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted." This situation just got a whole lot more complicated. If what you're saying is true, then I've potentially been taking a false report and treating the actual victim as a perpetrator. "You are doing your job with the information available to you," I said. "Nobody's questioning that, but now you have new information, and I trust you'll handle it appropriately." He nodded slowly. "I'll need to interview Ethan properly, get his full statement, photograph his injuries comprehensively, and probably call in Detective Lee from Domestic Violence to consult." "That sounds thorough and professional." Carter met my eyes directly. "Sir, I have to ask. If you weren't a captain, if you were just a regular father coming in here, would you expect me to handle this the same way?" The question was fair, even brave given the circumstances. A lot of officers would have just nodded along with whatever I said and covered themselves later. "Sergeant Carter, if I were a regular father coming in here and my son had visible injuries while the complainant had minor scratches, I would absolutely expect you to question the complainant's story and conduct a real investigation. The uniform doesn't change what happened tonight. It just got me in the door faster." He considered this, then nodded. "I appreciate you saying that, sir. Now, I'm going to step out and check on Ethan. When you're ready to take a statement, I'll need to recuse myself since I'm family. But I'd like Officer Rodriguez or someone else to sit in as a witness to ensure everything is handled properly." "Understood, sir." I left interview room 2 and found Ethan exactly where I'd left him. He looked up hopefully as I approached. "They're going to take your statement properly now," I told him. But first, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every detail, even the parts you think might make you look bad. Ethan glanced around the waiting area. 2 other people sat at the far end, both absorbed in their phones and clearly not paying attention to us. Mark's been worse lately, Ethan said quietly. Ever since Mom started her new job and is traveling more, he picks fights over stupid stuff, then gets physical when I don't back down. Tonight, I came home late from soccer practice because Coach kept us to work on set pieces. Mark was drunk, started yelling about disrespect and how I think I can do whatever I want. Did you respond? I tried to just go to my room, but he grabbed my arm and spun me around. Told me I'd look at him when he was talking to me. I pulled my arm away and he shoved me hard. I stumbled back into the wall. Ethan's voice remained steady, but his hands were shaking. I waited silently for him to continue. I told him to leave me alone, that I didn't want to fight with him. He got right in my face and said I was just like you. Thought I was better than everyone else because I played soccer and got good grades. Then he pushed me again and I pushed back. That's when he really went crazy. Define crazy. He started swinging, got me in the eye with his first punch. I blocked the second one and caught him with my forearm across his face. His glasses fell off, and I think that's when he got scratched by his own glasses or maybe when he fell into the coffee table. The detail about the glasses rang absolutely true. Mark wore thick-framed designer glasses that I'd noticed during our previous encounters. If those frames had gotten knocked around during the altercation, they could easily have scratched his face. What happened after he fell? I ran to my room and locked the door. He pounded on it for a while, yelling threats. Then it got quiet, and about 20 minutes later, the police showed up. Mark told them I'd attacked him unprovoked, and they hauled me down here without even really listening to my side. I processed this information, already building the narrative that would emerge from a proper investigation. Mark as the aggressor. Ethan defending himself. Injuries consistent with their respective stories. The scratches on Mark's face from his own glasses. Ethan's black eye from Mark's initial punch. Did anyone else witness any of this? No. Mom's in Chicago for a conference. Won't be back until Thursday. Does she know about the other incidents? Ethan looked away. Some of them. She always says Mark's under a lot of stress with work. That I need to be more understanding. I think she doesn't want to admit she made a mistake marrying him. The protective instinct I felt toward Ethan in that moment was matched only by my anger at Sarah for dismissing his concerns, but that was a conversation for another time. Sergeant Carter emerged from the back hallway and approached us. His posture had shifted from defensive to professional courtesy. Ethan, I'd like to take your formal statement now. We'll also have the EMT look at your injuries and take comprehensive photographs. Captain Miller, given your relationship to the complainant, I think it's best if you wait out here while we conduct the interview. Agreed. Ethan, tell Sergeant Carter everything exactly as you told me. Don't embellish. Don't leave things out because you think they make you look bad. Just the truth. Ethan nodded and stood. Carter led him toward the interview rooms, and I settled into one of the plastic chairs to wait. The next hour crawled by. I watched various officers move through the station on their shifts, responding to calls and processing paperwork. Several nodded to me in passing, curiosity evident on their faces, but professional enough not to ask questions. Finally, Carter returned with Ethan. My son looked exhausted, but calmer than before. The EMT had bandaged the cut above his eye and given him an ice pack for the swelling. Captain Miller, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I followed Carter to a small office near the front desk. He closed the door and leaned against the desk. Ethan's statement is consistent and detailed. The physical evidence supports his account. Mark's story has significant holes, and when Detective Lee reviewed the photographs, she noted that Mr. Branson's injuries appear superficial and defensive in nature, while Ethan's are consistent with being harmed. What's your recommendation? We're not pressing charges against Ethan. Mr. Branson's complaint will be noted as unfounded. However, Detective Lee wants to follow up with a full domestic violence investigation. She'll be contacting you and Ethan tomorrow to schedule formal interviews. Relief washed through me, though I kept my expression neutral. That sounds appropriate. Carter hesitated. Sir, off the record, I apologize for how I initially handled this. I should have been more thorough before making assumptions. You learned something tonight, Sergeant. That makes it a good night, even if it was a hard lesson. Ethan isn't going to file a formal complaint about your conduct because he understands you were doing your job. But maybe next time take an extra 10 minutes to question the easy narrative. Yes, sir. Absolutely. We returned to the waiting area where Ethan was gathering his belongings. Mark was nowhere to be seen, probably having called someone to pick him up after realizing his plan had backfired catastrophically. Come on, I told Ethan. Let's get you home. I'm not going back to that house tonight. I know. You're staying with me. We walked out to my car in silence. The night air was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the recycled atmosphere of the police station. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat and immediately slumped against the window. I started driving, not toward Mark and Sarah's house, but toward my apartment across town. After several minutes, Ethan spoke. Dad, I'm sorry for what? For not telling you how bad it was getting. For letting it go this far. I kept my eyes on the road. Ethan, you have nothing to apologize for. Mark is a grown man who chose to harm a teenager. That's on him, not you. Mom's going to be furious, probably, but that's also not your problem to solve. Your mother made her choice when she married Mark, and she'll have to make another choice now about whether to believe her son or her husband. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. What happens next? Detective Lee will investigate. Mark will likely face charges for harm against a minor. Your mother will have to decide what she wants to do about her marriage, and you focus on healing and finishing your junior year strong. That's it. I glanced at him. Were you expecting something more dramatic? I don't know. Part of me thought you'd arrest Mark yourself or something. Ethan, I'm a police captain, not a vigilante. Justice doesn't come from me putting on a uniform and intimidating people. It comes from making sure the system works the way it's supposed to, even when it's personal. But you did intimidate him. I saw Mark's face when you walked into that room. I couldn't deny that. I used my position to ensure a fair investigation. There's a difference between intimidation and leveling an unfair playing field. If I'd been anyone else, Carter might have dismissed her injuries and taken Mark's word at face value. My rank got me in the door and made people pay attention. But the actual evidence is what matters. We pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment complex. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh white glow that made Ethan's injuries look even worse than they had under the station's lighting. As we walked toward the elevator, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Sarah, David, what the hell is going on? I just got off my flight and there are 7 missed calls from Mark saying Ethan attacked him and got arrested. He's demanding I come home immediately and deal with our violent son. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. Ethan's face had gone pale, anxiety evident in every line of his body. Ethan wasn't arrested. Mark filed a false report after harming him. I intervened at the station, and after a proper investigation, the complaint against Ethan was determined to be unfounded. Silence stretched across the line. What do you mean Mark harmed him? Exactly what I said. Ethan came home from soccer practice. Mark was drunk and aggressive. Things escalated, and Mark threw the first punch. Ethan defended himself. Mark's response was to call the police and claim Ethan attacked him unprovoked. That's not, Mark wouldn't. I stepped out of the elevator and unlocked my apartment door, gesturing for Ethan to head inside. He disappeared into the guest room without a word. Sarah, I need you to really hear what I'm about to say. Mark gave Ethan a black eye, split his eyebrow open, and then tried to have him arrested for defending himself. This wasn't a mutual fight between equals. This was an adult man harming a teenager. Mark said Ethan's been getting increasingly aggressive. That he's been worried about this for months. My grip tightened on the phone. Has Ethan ever been aggressive with you? Well, no, but teenage boys can be different with their mothers than with. Has Ethan's school ever called you about fighting? No. Has his coach ever mentioned behavioral issues? David, I don't see what this has to do with. It has everything to do with it. Mark lied to the police about Ethan having a history of violence. He lied because he needed to establish a narrative that would make his story believable. But here are the facts. Ethan is an honor student, a varsity athlete with no disciplinary record, and a kid who's apparently been dealing with Mark's escalating aggression for months without telling anyone because he didn't want to cause problems. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice had changed. Months? Ethan mentioned incidents? Physical intimidation, grabbing, shoving? I heard her breathing become uneven. The telltale sound of someone fighting tears. I need to talk to him. Not tonight. He's exhausted. He's injured. And he needs rest. You can see him tomorrow, but Sarah, you need to decide something before the conversation happens. Decide what? Whether you're going to believe your husband or your son. Because Ethan has physical evidence, a consistent story, and the backing of the police investigation. Mark has scratches from his own glasses and a history of lying. So, you need to figure out whose side you're on before you walk into that conversation. That's not fair. I'm his mother. I'm always on his side. Then prove it. Because right now, Ethan thinks you're going to choose Mark. The call ended without a proper goodbye. I stood in my living room staring at the phone, wondering if I'd been too harsh. But Ethan needed to know someone was completely in his corner, even if it meant burning bridges with his mother. I knocked softly on the guest room door. Ethan, you hungry? Not really. I'm ordering pizza anyway. You should eat something. I called in an order to the place 2 blocks over that Ethan liked, then settled onto the couch with my laptop. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, so I might as well get some work done. But instead of opening case files, I found myself pulling up Mark's background. The search revealed nothing alarming on the surface. Mark worked in sales for a pharmaceutical company, had lived in the area for 8 years, owned a house with Sarah, no prior arrests or charges, a model citizen on paper. But I'd learned long ago that paperwork only told part of the story. I opened a different database, one that tracked calls to residences, even if no charges were filed. The address Mark shared with Sarah popped up twice in the past year. Both times neighbors had called about loud arguments. Both times responding officers had noted everything seemed calm when they arrived, and no one wanted to press charges. Classic pattern, escalating verbal mistreatment, testing boundaries, seeing what he could get away with before moving to physical violence. Ethan had probably been dealing with this deteriorating situation far longer than a few months. The pizza arrived, and I coaxed Ethan out of his room. We ate in relative silence, the television playing some mindless action movie neither of us really watched. Around midnight, Ethan finally spoke. Do you think Mom will believe me? I sat down my pizza slice. Honestly, I don't know. Your mother has always had a hard time admitting when she's wrong about people. It's easier for her to make excuses than to face uncomfortable truths. That's pretty harsh, Dad. It's accurate. Look at our marriage. I worked constantly, prioritized the job over family time, and your mother made excuses for it for years before finally admitting she was unhappy. She didn't want to rock the boat, so she just let resentment build until it exploded. Ethan considered this. Is that why you got divorced? Part of it. The job was demanding, but I also didn't make enough effort to balance things. We were both at fault in different ways. The difference is I acknowledged my part. Your mother still thinks the divorce was entirely about my work schedule. She told me once that you loved being a cop more than you loved us. The words stung even years later. That's not true, but I understand why she felt that way. I missed school plays, family dinners, birthdays. I was always on call, always responding to emergencies. From the outside, it probably looked like I cared more about strangers than my own family. Did you? I met his eyes directly. No, but I cared about doing the job right, about making sure people got justice when they needed it. I convinced myself that by being the best cop I could be, I was protecting you and your mother even when I wasn't physically there. I was wrong about that. You can't protect people by being absent. Ethan absorbed this in silence. The movie played on, explosions and car chases filling the quiet spaces between us. Mark told me once that you were a terrible father, Ethan said eventually. That you abandoned us for your career and Mom was better off without you. My jaw tightened. When was this? About 6 months ago. I'd mentioned wanting to visit you for the weekend, and he went off about how you didn't deserve my respect. That you'd chosen strangers over your family. That I was wasting my time trying to have a relationship with you. What did you say? I told him he didn't know what he was talking about. That just because you worked a lot didn't mean you didn't care. He got really angry. Said I was brainwashed and too stupid to see how you'd manipulated me. Another piece clicked into place. Mark hadn't just been verbally abusive. He'd been working to isolate Ethan, to damage our relationship, to make Ethan doubt the one person who might intervene if things got worse. That's when the physical stuff started, wasn't it? After you defended me. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah. He shoved me against the wall that night, got right in my face, and said if I ever talked back to him like that again, he'd teach me some respect. After that, it was like he was always looking for reasons to get physical. Bumping into me hard in the hallway, grabbing my shoulder too tight, that kind of thing. Why didn't you tell me? I thought I could handle it, and I didn't want to make things worse for Mom. She seemed happy with Mark at first. I figured if I just avoided him and kept my head down, eventually I'd graduate and go to college, and it wouldn't matter anymore. The pizza sat forgotten on the coffee table. I turned to face Ethan fully, making sure he heard every word I was about to say. Listen to me very carefully. What Mark did wasn't your fault. Not any of it. Not the verbal mistreatment, not the physical intimidation, and definitely not what happened tonight. He's a grown man who chose to target a teenager because he knew he could get away with it. You didn't provoke this. You didn't deserve it. And you absolutely should have told me the first time he put his hands on you. I know that now. Do you? Because I need you to really understand this. There's no amount of backtalk or attitude or teenage moodiness that justifies an adult harming a child. Mark didn't hit you because you disrespected him. He hit you because he's a mistreater who was testing his power. And when you stood up for yourself, he couldn't handle it. Ethan's eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. Detective Lee said basically the same thing when she interviewed me. She said, mistreaters always blame their victims. Make it seem like the victim forced them to be violent. She's right. And that's exactly what Mark tried to do tonight by filing that police report. He wanted to control the narrative, make himself the victim, and have you punished for defending yourself. But you stopped him. The evidence stopped him. I just made sure people actually looked at the evidence instead of making assumptions. We sat together for another hour, talking through everything that had happened over the past months. Ethan recounted incidents I hadn't known about. Moments where Mark had been cruel or controlling. Times when Sarah had dismissed concerns because she didn't want to see the truth. By the time Ethan finally went to bed, it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I sat alone in the darkened living room, anger simmering beneath the surface of my professional calm. Mark had spent months terrorizing my son, and tonight had been the culmination of that mistreatment. But now he'd made a critical error. He'd involved the police, created an official record, and given me everything I needed to ensure he faced consequences. The uniform I'd worn tonight had opened doors, but the investigation that followed would be entirely by the book. Mark would face charges, Sarah would have to make choices, and Ethan would be protected moving forward. We arrived at my apartment building 15 minutes later. I led Ethan upstairs and set him up in the guest room that had essentially become his second bedroom over the years. He kept clothes here, his textbooks, his soccer gear. "Get some sleep," I told him. "We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." "Dad, thank you for showing up like that." "Always, kid. Every single time." He nodded and closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the weight of the evening finally settle on my shoulders. Then I walked to my own room and carefully hung up my uniform. The classes went back in the closet, the badges and ribbons gleaming in the dim light. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Mark. "This isn't over. You can't just waltz in and ruin my life because you have a badge." I stared at the message for several seconds, then typed a response. "Mr. Branson, I didn't ruin your life. You did that when you put your hands on my son. What happens next is a direct result of your choices, not mine. If you contact Ethan or attempt to intimidate him in any way, I will ensure that every legal consequence available falls on you. This conversation is over." I blocked his number and set my phone aside. In the morning, I'd forward the text to Detective Lee as additional evidence of Mark's state of mind. 3 days later, Ethan and I sat in a conference room at the main precinct while Detective Lee laid out the results of her investigation. Sarah sat across from us, her expression unreadable. She'd returned from Chicago the morning after the incident and had initially been skeptical of Ethan's account. But as the evidence mounted and Mark's story fell apart under questioning, her position had shifted. "Mr. Branson has been charged with harm against a minor and filing a false police report," Detective Lee said. "Given the evidence and his lack of prior record, he'll likely receive a plea deal involving probation, anger management classes, and a restraining order keeping him away from Ethan." "What about the house?" Sarah asked quietly. "I'm the primary owner, but Mark's name is on the deed, too." "That's a civil matter outside my jurisdiction," Lee replied. "But the restraining order will require him to maintain distance from Ethan, which may impact living arrangements." Sarah turned to Ethan. "I'm so sorry, honey. I should have listened when you tried to tell me things weren't right. I just didn't want to see it." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mom. It's not okay, but I'm going to make it right." The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. As we walked out of the precinct, Sarah pulled me aside while Ethan waited by the car. "David, I know things between us didn't end well, and I know I didn't take Ethan's concerns seriously enough, but thank you for being there for him when I wasn't. He's our son, Sarah. I'll always be there for him." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I'm filing for divorce. Mark moved out yesterday. I don't know how I convinced myself he was a good man. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do next." "Yeah." She wiped her eyes. "Ethan's lucky to have you as his father." I didn't respond to that. Just walked back to where Ethan was waiting. We drove home in comfortable silence. The kind that comes from knowing the worst is over and everything else is just details to sort through. The case against Mark moved forward over the following weeks. He took a plea deal rather than face trial, receiving 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a 5-year restraining order. Sarah's divorce proceedings moved quickly since Mark didn't contest it. Ethan finished his junior year with a 4.0 GPA and led his soccer team to the state semifinals. He started college visits during the summer, talking about schools on the East Coast where he could study engineering and maybe play club soccer. And me? I went back to work, handling the endless parade of cases and administrative duties that came with the rank I'd earned. But I kept my classy uniform pressed and ready in the closet, just in case another situation arose where showing up in uniform was exactly what the situation required. Because sometimes justice needs a little push in the right direction. And sometimes, a father's badge opens doors that should have been open all along. What would you have done if it was your family?